Today on Facts at 5, our special guest is Southampton Supervisor Jay Schneiderman. We're excited that he's here. He's going to talk about some historic legislation. We've all been following the Shinnecock issue and the unmarked graves, and something very major has occurred, and I'm glad that, Jay, you're here to talk about what's happened. First of all, tell us a little bit of history, because I know this has been a long-standing issue. There were some protests last month. You had started some town hall meetings. Tell us give us a little background on that first.
Yeah, it's not a little bit of history. It's
no, 400 years.
It's a lot of history. And we tend to focus on, a post-colonial history. We see all the historic landmark signs as we drive around. We look at the beautiful windmills, all the vestiges from our colonial past. But long before that, the Shinnecock Nation were here, the indigenous people of this region, and the Montauk too. Actually, Montauk is how it apparently was said, the Montauk. And in fact, Shinnecocks were part of the larger, Montauk people. And in fact, Chief Wyandanch was the head of the Montauk Nation. And so, his name is still on the community of Wyandanch. It really was all of Long Island. So, we're the newcomers. We're the recent arrivals. In the town of Southampton, the Shinnecocks still maintain a reservation. It's they are a federally recognized Indian tribe or Indian nation. And the property the 800 acres that they called the neck or the reservation was not necessarily where their ancestral area of habitation was. They were moved to that area from the Shinnecock Hills area. Up in Shinnecock Hills, they had a kind of a contact era fort in an area called Fort Hill. And then there was their ancestral burial grounds is an area called Sugarloaf. And they have known for millennium that's their ancestral burial ground. There's undulating hills in that area. Shinnecock Bay used to be a freshwater body, so typically these Native American larger habitation sites were near freshwater bodies, like you see around Lake Montauk out in Montauk. So Shinnecock Bay was, up until the 1938 hurricane, was a freshwater body. And Shinnecock Hills, that was their main habitation area. And this area, Sugarloaf, was their main burial area. And the state has long recognized those areas on important state maps, cultural resource maps. And the problem is the town of Southampton really had no protections in place. So what happened recently, we enacted two things. One, a moratorium on development on those highly, in those highly culturally sensitive areas, particularly stringent in the burial area, but also fairly stringent on in the habitation area, because we don't want to lose what we might be able to learn still from archaeology in that area. So we want to make sure that important cultural sites are not disturbed, but in particular, we want to respect the sanctity of human remains that are in this area. So a couple years ago, a developer was putting in a house, dug a foundation on a street called Hawthorne Road. Excuse me. And during the excavation, unearthed human remains. Right. And it was sort of interesting. Luckily, this developer alerted us and the police to that discovery. I have a feeling that many people through the years have not done that, but this developer did. And I immediately went to halt construction, which was interesting. So I said to the building inspector, we need to stop construction at this property. And the building inspector's response was, by what legal basis do you want me to issue a stop work order? I said, there's got to be something in the code.
Right.
No. There's got to be something in state law. No. New York is one of 4 states that don't have state ordinances, state laws. that deal with what you do when you find human remains on a property. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And this is something the Shinnecock have been saying for years, you know, that there has to be a framework of laws. So that's what we passed. So I worked for quite a while on developing a really strong piece of legislation to protect these burial sites.
Let's talk about it, because it looks like it is a pretty stiff penalty. It's like 10, what constitutes that? I saw $10,000, 15 days in jail.
A series of steps. Yeah, there's a series of steps from, you know, from the very beginning. You know, you stop work. You stop, right. There's no work can happen on the property. The police are notified. Police obviously have to figure out whether somebody's got to figure out whether it's human remains. It could be an animal, it could be a dog, could be, you know, it could be a deer, you know.
But are there areas that we know there are these unmarked? Well, if they're unmarked graves, we don't know they're there. Is it just like a hit and miss? Oh, I found something, or are there certain areas that are protected, like north of the highway, that we say stay away from?
Well, once we know, sure. Okay. Once we know, some of these areas are unmarked. You know, obviously, if you see a mound with stone circles around, right. You know, it's a pretty good indication that there's a burial there. That was a practice of the indigenous people of this region, but that was only during a certain period that they buried in that manner. You know, in the later periods, they started adapting some of the European practices with marking, you know, with headstones and things like that. But that earlier period, you know, and you'll see this if you go out to some of the properties in Montauk, the known burial grounds, you'll see these stone circles still. Sometimes they get, you know, overgrown with grass or other vegetation. Sometimes I think people have stolen or taken the stones away. But there's still some of these intact stone circles, actually ovals, because they were oriented in an east-west direction. And the body was placed, I believe, sitting with funerary objects. And I believe because, you know, the body would face either the setting sun or the rising sun as it tracked across. So it was part of, you know, it was a part of their spiritual practice. In terms of how things were oriented. So it's really fascinating. I am not an expert. There's lots of really incredible experts. In fact, the woman, Gaynell Stone, I think is her name, wrote a book about the Montauk Indians. It's pretty fascinating, you know.
Well, there's a lot of history. We know all
really interesting archaeological digs out there. The Schneiderman dig at Montauk County Park. It's really fascinating history,
What do you think what made it happen this time, you know, with the town board and everything? Because I know this has been a long standing thing, and it's gone through different supervisors, and here you are, and it's a great breakthrough. But what do you think pushed it through?
I think there's a number of factors. One is you had a town board that was willing to do it. I think a lot of people, you know, resisted doing this because maybe because they didn't want to stop development or hurt construction. You know, I think you had a sympathetic town supervisor and a sympathetic town board, but you also had a pretty organized group of people. The Graves Protection Warriors, by Becky Ginia. There was a documentary film that was in the Hamptons Film Festival by a woman named Trevor Wormfeld, I believe is her name, called Conscience Point. And I think that helped raise awareness and sort of a critical mass of people who were saying, you know, put it on the books, do something. You know, and I studied, you know, I looked at other legislation. I looked at what was pending in New York, because Albany, you know, for years they've been trying to pass a bill. I tried to figure out what best practices were. I think the bill we passed is as good as it gets. I think it's the best anywhere. And it was done in conjunction with the Shinnecock Nation. So I met a number of times with tribal leaders trying to get it right. And they were, I just got a letter from Brian Polite, the chairman of the Shinnecock. And it was, you know, really very, very appreciative. In fact,
that's good.
He called me 3 times since we passed it to thank me and the town board. So they're very happy. And the moratorium, East Hampton has some laws already on the books
Okay.
to try to prevent the desecration of graves and the
Yeah.
destruction of artifacts. Southampton does not.
Okay.
So, East Hampton has I think they call it the circles and squares map.
Mm-hmm.
And if you fall within a certain distance of a known find, you have to do archaeology.
Okay.
In Southampton, if you're building a single family home, even in these known burial areas, you don't have to do anything. You just get a building permit and you build. Now in this moratorium area, you have to do archaeology. If you want to proceed, you have to do archaeology first. And it's a 6-month moratorium so that we can figure out what laws we need on the books before people develop in those areas.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be very similar. You're going to have to do archaeology. You're going to have to do some test holes in the ground, make sure that where you're building your pool or your garage or your house isn't going to disturb a burial area or a significant archaeological resource.
Yeah, well, I think it sounds like a very significant and important breakthrough in legislation, acknowledging something that has, bothered a group of people, and rightly so, really. And it's, we have a great history here. We have all these, names that go back, all these years, and so honoring this is very important. I'm glad.
Isn't it interesting? We have the names on everything.
Right?
On everything, all across Long Island, from Patchogue and Hauppauge and Montauk.
Oh my gosh! I remember doing an interview with them at the Stephen Tuck House and Stephen Tuckus, and all the history of, all the so many areas out here. So, we are our past and even going forward. So I think that's great. The last time we spoke actually on a Zoom was when we were discussing AFD, the Feed the Need,
sure.
Which is, I thought, a great regional reach out. How are things going with AFD? We spoke when it was just getting going. And,
sure. Well, so when the pandemic hit, we realized a lot of people were out of work and a lot of people were going to struggle to put food on the table to feed their families. And it became really apparent early on that we had some very affluent people in the community that we knew. We knew, obviously, this is the Hamptons, and there were people with great financial means, and they wanted to help their workers. They wanted to help the people who were mowing the lawns and washing the toilets and the dishes. And the problem was, in the affluent communities, the workers of those affluent communities weren't living in the affluent communities for the most part. They were living in basements in Hampton Bays and Riverhead and Mattatuck. And so we needed an organization, a regional organization where people could donate to, and we could distribute the funds to food pantries based on the need throughout the East End. There was nothing like that. So we took a dormant organization called All for the East End, AFD. Fred Thiel and I, Assemblyman Thiel, we revived it with a woman named Claudia Pilato. That way we didn't have to start our own 501c3, not-for-profit. We used this existing one, and then we put together a board of directors, and we went about the business of fundraising. And we set a goal at $1 million.
Where is it now?
We wanted to raise $1 million.
That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. We broke $1 million very recently.
Very great. Oh, excited.
We hit our goal, and we have every food pantry on both North and South Fork and Riverhead are participating organizations.
That's great.
We've been doling out grants. We're now sort of at a crossroads trying to figure out what the future of AFD is.
Right.
Although the pandemic we hope is going to subside soon, we do think some of the economics will be long lasting.
Yeah, well,
the consequences. So I don't think this is it's going to be a very difficult time economically for a lot of people. So we think AFD still needs to be around, but we've talked about expanding the role to deal with mental health issues, homelessness.
That's great. Well, it's nice that vehicle exists and that everybody pulled together on that. I'm excited to hear that.
We have some big regional organizations that work on environmental issues, like the Group for the East End, Pine Barren Society and things like that. We don't have a regional organization that works on social needs. And we do
That's
now
amazing.
with AFD.
That's great.
You know, it's really important. And we do
Good.
have a lot of social issues, from, you know, daycare to public transportation, healthcare issues,
Yeah.
opioid addiction, you know, lots of things that need help,
Yeah.
need
Well,
financial resources.
That's exciting to hear. I am so happy about that, because I remember at the time how scary everything was, and we're dealing with this as we're going through it. You know, it feels different now, 6 months later, and yet we still have a lot of things ahead of us. But I think this regional approach is amazing, and thank you for joining us. Southampton Town Supervisor Jay Schneiderman, congratulations on the Shinnecock breakthrough and all the other things that you're efforting. And we're glad to have you. Come back and join us again, please.
Love to. Thank you, Angela, for having me.
All right, thanks.
All right.